Invisible Maniac 1990 just a low-budget cult shocker? It wasn't just an obscure direct-to-video curiosity. It was a chaotic, censored experiment that nearly collapsed under its own secrets. What audiences never saw were the studio arguments, the last-minute edits, the alternate endings quietly buried, and the version that was never meant to leave the editing room. Scenes were cut, motivations were softened, an entire ending was reshaped to avoid backlash. Tonight, we're pulling back that curtain. This video reveals 20 behind-the-scenes truths about the Invisible Maniac 1990, including the endings they tried to hide. And one final revelation explains why the version you've seen may not be the story that was originally filmed. Stay to the end and watch closely. Fact number 1. The Invisible Maniac 1990 was rushed, not planned. The Invisible Maniac didn't begin as a carefully structured production. It erupted out of urgency. The project was assembled fast, financed fast, and scheduled even faster. The goal wasn't perfection, it was momentum. The producers wanted to strike while invisibility effects were still cheap enough to attempt with practical tricks. What audiences didn't know is that the script was still evolving during early shooting days. Pages arrived late, dialogue shifted overnight, entire character beats were reworked between call sheets. This wasn't chaos by accident, it was survival filmmaking. The crew wasn't chasing polish, they were chasing completion. That urgency bleeds into the final film. Scenes feel abrupt, transitions feel sharp. Not because of incompetence, but because time was collapsing around the production. It wasn't a slow burn, it was a sprint. Fact number 2. The title was a marketing decision, not a creative one. The name, The Invisible Maniac, wasn't chosen for subtlety, it was chosen for shelves. What audiences didn't know is that several alternate titles circulated during development, each one toned differently, each one pitched toward a different audience. The final title won because it was direct, loud, unmistakable. This wasn't arthouse branding, it was video store warfare. Producers wanted something that popped from across the aisle, something that explained the entire premise in 3 words. Not mystery, but clarity. The title dictated expectations, and those expectations pressured the edit. Scenes that slowed the pacing or deepened psychology were trimmed because they didn't match the promise on the box. The film you see isn't just a story, it's a product shaped by a name. Fact number 3. The invisibility effects were built around limitation. There was no digital safety net, no post-production miracles. What audiences didn't know is that every invisibility moment was planned around what couldn't be shown. Camera angles were locked, blocking was rigid, performers hit invisible marks with precision or the illusion shattered. It wasn't about showing nothing, it was about hiding everything else. Simple tricks, careful framing, sound cues, delayed reactions did most of the work. When effects failed, scenes were rewritten on the spot to avoid showing too much. That constraint shaped tone. It forced tension. Not spectacle, but suggestion. The fear comes from absence because absence was all they could afford. Fact number 4. The lead performance was physically isolating. Playing an unseen presence sounds easy. It wasn't. What audiences didn't know is that much of the lead's work happened alone, off camera, or separated from other performers entirely. Lines were delivered to empty space. Reactions were imagined. Timing had to be perfect without feedback. It wasn't acting against a scene partner. It was acting against silence. That isolation affects performance. Movements become sharper. Delivery becomes more aggressive. The character feels disconnected because the actor often was. Not by design, but by necessity. The result is unsettling and real. Fact number 5. Entire character backstories were cut in editing. Early versions of the film contained more context, more explanation, more motivation. What audiences didn't know is that several scenes designed to humanize characters were removed late in post-production. The reasoning was simple: pacing. The cut needed to move, fast, relentless. Subtlety slowed momentum. So emotional groundwork disappeared. Relationships became thinner. Decisions felt more abrupt. It wasn't carelessness, It was strategy. But those cuts quietly changed the story. Characters stopped feeling like people and started feeling like pieces on a board. That shift wasn't written, it was edited into existence. Fact number 6. Studio notes pushed the film toward shock over story. Once early footage was reviewed, feedback arrived and it wasn't gentle. What audiences didn't know is that producers encouraged emphasis on moments that played strongest in isolation rather than in narrative flow. Scenes that worked as clips survived, scenes that required patience didn't. This wasn't about coherence, it was about reaction. The result is a film that lunges instead of builds, jumps instead of settles, not because the filmmakers didn't care, but because they were responding to pressure. The movie becomes louder as it goes, sharper, more abrupt. Story gave way to impact. Fact number 7. Sound design became the real star. With limited visual effects, sound carried weight. What audiences didn't know is that post-production focused heavily on audio cues. Footsteps, breathing, environmental shifts to sell presence. Silence was weaponized, not what you see, what you hear. Editors layered subtle effects to suggest movement through space. A chair creaks, air shifts, a pause stretches too long. The unseen becomes tangible because sound refuses to let you relax. It's not flashy, it's effective, and it's doing more work than most viewers realize. Fact number 8. The film's pacing was rebuilt multiple times. There wasn't one final cut, there were several. What audiences didn't know is that test screenings revealed wildly different reactions depending on scene order. Some edits leaned chaotic, others leaned procedural. Neither fully worked. So the final version became a compromise. Scenes were rearranged, tension was front-loaded. The middle was tightened aggressively. The film you see isn't the cleanest version, it's the most survivable one. A version that could pass scrutiny without stalling momentum. Fact number 9. The setting was chosen for control, not style. Locations weren't selected for beauty, they were selected for access. What audiences didn't know is that limited locations allowed the crew to reset quickly and reshoot when effects failed. Controlled spaces meant controlled problems. This wasn't world building, it was containment. The enclosed environments amplify claustrophobia, but they also made production possible. The setting feels intentional, it's also practical. Fact number 10. The film's reputation changed its legacy. Here's the truth. The Invisible Maniac didn't become infamous overnight. What audiences didn't know is that its reputation grew slowly, fueled by word of mouth and late-night rentals. Each retelling exaggerated what the film contained, and that legend reshaped how it was viewed, not as a film, but as a forbidden object. If you're still watching right now, go ahead and like and subscribe because this is the exact kind of buried film history most channels never touch. The movie's power became less about content and more about rumor, and rumor is hard to erase. Fact number 11. Censorship pressure influenced the final act. As release approached, concerns mounted. What audiences didn't know is that distributors worried about tone, especially how far the film went in its closing stretch. Requests came in to soften implications, not remove scenes, reframe meaning. Moments were shortened, reactions trimmed, context blurred. The goal wasn't to change events, but to dull their impact. And that led directly to the ending you know. Fact number 12. An alternate ending was fully assembled. This isn't speculation. What audiences didn't know is that a complete alternate ending existed shot, edited, and scored. It leaned darker, more definitive, less ambiguous. That version didn't test well. Not because it failed technically, but because it refused comfort. The studio hesitated, and hesitation killed it. The ending was replaced not due to quality, but due to fear of response. Fact number 13. The hidden ending changed the message. The theatrical ending implies containment, resolution. The alternate ending suggested continuation, consequence. What audiences didn't know is that this shift altered the film's entire meaning. One ending says the threat is over, the other says it was never contained at all. That difference matters. It reframes everything that came before. Fact number 14. Test audiences reacted strongly to the original ending. Early viewers didn't just react, they recoiled. What audiences didn't know is that feedback described the original ending as unsettling and too final. That wasn't a flaw, that was the point. But market concerns won. The ending was reshaped to allow distance instead of discomfort. Fact number 15. Footage from the original ending was never destroyed. Here's the quiet part. What audiences didn't know is that the original ending wasn't erased. It was archived, stored, forgotten, not lost, but hidden by obscurity. Collectors whisper about it, but no official release has restored it. Fact number 16. Editing choices. Softened responsibility. The final cut shifts blame away from intent and toward chaos. What audiences didn't know is that earlier versions held characters more accountable. The revised ending blurs that clarity. Not innocence, but ambiguity. That wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. Fact number 17. The ending was designed to end debate. Studios don't like questions lingering. They don't like uncertainty echoing after the credits roll. What audiences didn't know is that the chosen ending was engineered to close discussion, not invite it. Early cuts left implications unresolved, motives lingered, consequences felt unfinished. That unsettled executives. So the final version tightens everything. Loose ends are tied. Threats are implied to be neutralized. The camera stops asking questions, not tension, but containment. The goal wasn't ambiguity, it was reassurance. A clear stop point, a sense that the story is done. Finality replaces unease. And in doing so, the ending quietly reshapes what the film is allowed to mean. Fact number 18. Fans noticed the inconsistencies. Time has a way of sharpening attention. Over the years, viewers began spotting gaps, reactions that felt delayed, decisions that seemed rushed, moments that hinted at something removed. What audiences didn't know is that these inconsistencies weren't mistakes, they were scars from revision. Online discussions slowly resurrected the idea of a missing ending. Frame-by-frame analysis followed. Comparisons were made. Questions stacked up. Something felt incomplete, and fans weren't imagining it. The film behaves like it's missing a final breath. A last statement that never fully lands. That quiet wrongness became impossible to ignore. The more people rewatched, the clearer the absence became. Fact number 19. The film's cult status depends on what's missing. Ironically, what isn't shown is exactly why the film survives. What audiences didn't know is that uncertainty became its greatest asset. The missing pieces invite speculation. The softened ending leaves space for interpretation. Not answers, but echoes. Fans debate what the original ending implied. They imagine how it might have reframed the story. That absence keeps the film alive long after its release window closed. Mystery preserved interest. The film stopped being a finished object and became a question mark, and question marks endure. In trying to make the story safer, the studio accidentally gave it longevity. The absence didn't weaken the film, it fueled it. Fact number 20. The ending you saw wasn't the ending they shot. This is the truth that reframes everything. The Invisible Maniac ends, but not the way it was conceived. What audiences didn't know is that the final image was chosen not for story, but for safety. The original ending lingered. Accused refused closure. The released version closes the door, but somewhere in storage, another ending still exists, one that refuses to let the story rest, and that's the legacy of The Invisible Maniac. A film remembered not just for what it shows, but for what it hides. If you want more buried truths like this, stay sharp and keep watching.